fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCBQ 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We got Mr. Dave Martino
in the house.
In the
basement of the House of Mystery.
Yeah, you got to be somewhere. You know, are you digging under the house?
I'm digging under the house,
following that TikTok.
That's right. I saw that, and I'm like, I just got to start digging.
Yeah. Wow. Get rid.
Wait for the House of Mystery to just implode.
Yeah. I guess sometimes people don't realize what they're doing is they're digging out the foundation and under the house, that it kind of makes the house unstable.
Just a little bit.
But nowadays you can do it on TikTok Live, and people watch you, and you'll amass 300,000 plus viewers, and they're all entertained, and now it starts a trend. Now people are going under their houses and digging.
I got to start doing that now.
Yeah, get to work.
Yeah.
And it's just for a storm shelter. I don't know what kind of storm she was expecting.
No.
More than I've seen. I don't know. Maybe I'm living in a good area and no storms.
It's like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. I don't know. She's waiting for Dorothy to come. Strange stuff. Okay. Now let's see. Oh, I should also talk about, we have the Noir at the Bar starting. It already started. Now, first reading edition starts this Thursday, the 25th, I believe it is, and that's on KKNW 1150 AM Seattle, and is authors that are reading their work, and they do 8-minute segment of reading, and these are the authors that will be featured in the Left Coast Crime in Seattle this year from April 11th to 14th, so don't miss it.
I won't.
Yeah, you better not. I'm watching. You better. I'm going to test you.
Hey.
To make sure that you heard every second. You better pass.
I will.
Well, speaking of tests and passing and everything, we've got a teacher here, and he's going to explain to you how to count.
I need that.
Yeah, I know. He's written a new book. Of course, the new book is called Lumpy's Gift, and we're going to find out all about that and about what he's doing to make this a better world. So, Mr. Christopher Packard, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, listen, so you've got quite the history, much more surprising than I would figure. Now, before this Lumpy's Gift, which is a children's book you've written, you were writing books on mythical creatures of Maine, and you're kind of into all that stuff, cryptozoology. So what's going on there? How did you get into that?
Well, that is the $10,000 question for a science teacher turned children's author turned cryptozoologist. So, cryptozoology is the study of mysterious, not yet known to science creatures and beings and other unusual happenings. I always kind of had an interest in that as a young person. And my family's from Maine, out here on the right coast, and it's a lot of woods out here. My grandfather was a hunter, trapper, guide kind of fellow and ran some resort cabins for many years. And they were great storytellers, always spinning yarns about creatures and mysterious beings that they would meet while out on these hunts and guiding trips. And I always just sort of thought they were making it up. But then I learned there was this rich sort of folklore behind all of this that had been passed down for generations, not just in my family, but really the whole country, like throughout the so-called lumber woods, the northern forests, and anywhere people go out in the woods and tell stories and spend time. And I was just raised with a lot of stories of all sorts, humorous and whatnot. And I got sort of caught up in the threads of this folklore and the mystery of these creatures. And I just thought they were made up when I was young. And then I became an adult and found out they had sort of this long-term history that I thought people might like to hear about. And as a young person, I was also interested in Bigfoot and Mothman and all of those types of things as well. And I sort of saw the connection and just became an obsession and turned into a book and became part of my performance storytelling that I do around the state as well. Not a guide myself, but a guide to stories and fictions that make us think about who we are and what the world is like.
Have you ever had a sighting of a cryptozoological creature?
I think the weirdest thing I saw that sort of, like, I was a teenager. And but I was with a friend, and we were sitting on my family dock on this lake by our cabin, and there was no substances or alcohol involved in this. We were just chatting in the evening, and these two glowing balls float along the shore, like through the woods, going behind trees, maybe 15 feet up in the air, and they look like, I guess, the size of a basketball, and one in front of the other, a little offset in their height. And they just we both watched them go through, and we're both like, do you see that? And, we both saw it, and it was a really amazing thing that, it almost like, and your mind does this thing where it turns these weird experiences like, did that really happen? But like, I know it happened because I experienced it with this other person. And so that's probably the weirdest thing I've seen. And I don't know if it wasn't a creature, but it was certainly something unknown and mysterious, and goes along with sort of what, our ancestors might have called the will-o'-the-wisp tradition, or
Right.
Where, don't follow the lights into the woods. And there's all sorts of great stories about that.
I always follow the lights in the woods, and I always make it out okay.
Yeah, that explains
sometimes
a lot.
I have a good time. Yeah, sometimes I have a good time. Well, but you got into being a science teacher, right?
Yeah.
So how much can be science, and how much of it is, in a way, aren't we really unsure about Bigfoot? We don't know. And there's been a number of years and over a long period of time where there's been rumors of Bigfoot and all that sort of stuff and that. But we don't really have any physical proof, do we?
No, which is why it's cryptozoological, it's Fortean, it's beyond the scope of science. And I see all of this like interest in myself as being sort of like the gateway science, like that led me to biology. I'm a biologist by training, and an interest in the world and discovering and learning about what's out there. And the thing I always remember is that science is, in its modern form, is at most like 200 years old. But our ancestors, who we love to underestimate, who lived for thousands of years before that, and indigenous people that get encountered by, scientists trying to study animals in a new area, would always talk about, oh, there's moose and there's salmon and there's bear, and like this happens at this time of the year, and you got to watch out for the little people and the floating lights and the big hairy man and the water monsters, right? There are these shared creatures that our ancestors are always talking about, and they're telling people about and saying they had experiences with. And so, I think it's wrong to underestimate that value of that ancestral knowledge, that idea that our ancestors, in whatever culture you're from, like had this relationship and understanding of what it meant to live in the world that involved these mysterious incidences and these now unknown creatures. And, I can't explain to you how my cell phone gets all the information, but I know that it works. And so I wonder if there's some of this knowledge that our ancestors, having lived with a life that like literally depended on understanding nature, knew about these creatures, yet the way we do science doesn't perceive them. So is it cultural? Is it spiritual? Is it something that really doesn't fit into our modern scientific Western paradigm of culture and language? And I think it's probably a little bit of all of those things. And, some stories are just made up. Some stories probably go to a deeper truth. And so that's kind of how I write it in my head, just because we don't have evidence doesn't mean that absence of evidence isn't evidence that it doesn't exist. But, a good scientist says, well, there isn't evidence to indicate that they exist. So we don't have biological management plans for Bigfoot, but, a lot of anecdotal evidence exists that says, it's an important cultural phenomenon and maybe has reflections in a scientific way of looking at things that we don't yet understand. I don't know.
Drugs.
Could be drugs too.
They were doing a lot of smoking. Well, it's interesting in that. But it's kind of on the edge. So, especially in today's world, right? There's so many conspiracies and weird stuff and people talking about all sorts of things that sometimes it goes further than you expect. What was kind of the most wild story that you ever had with any of these, creatures?
Like told to me by a person I met?
Yeah. One that you kind of, it stays with you today that you still think about.
Yeah. So, I mean, you get told, like, you read a lot of stories, and then when you start going out and, like, telling these stories and collecting stories from people and talking about this stuff, people tell you all sorts of interesting things. And, sometimes people tell you about, like, abductions or by aliens, or like how there's like they're communicating with Bigfoot, and those are all kind of out there. And then sometimes people have these like where they're really shaken and they really saw something like out in the woods, and these people who are seasoned outdoors men and women come across something that like doesn't match up with anything they've expected before. So they saw something, but what did they see? What is related to that? Were there drugs involved? Sometimes, obviously, or sometimes are they just spinning a story? Some of these stories are very well crafted. But I think there's so many experiences that some of them are real. I don't have a really good one that jumps to mind that, sort of, sticks out to me.
Well, and you're also dealing with, I guess there's, when you hear this stuff, you get aliens and abductions and stuff like that. So it kind of ties in with that too, right? It's kind of another one that people quite often question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And, if you look like 200 years ago, nobody was talking about aliens, but they certainly talked about like lights flying through the sky and like getting abducted by little people and like, having experiences, and they were never right again. And then today we don't hear about like, fairy world abductions, but we do hear all the time about, these alien abductions that, tells us, like, are these just like transferences of like how we interpret these experiences we have based on our culture, or are they just like catchy psychoses? I guess it's up to, however we want to understand that to be able to, deal with these stories in the world. So, I think they're more related than maybe we let on. I mean, the cultural implications of this and the fact that like we feel the need to tell these stories is important in some way. And I don't know exactly what it means, but I know that it's important. Story is really powerful. It's the way we hold our culture together and convey all that information. And, it lets us see into our, see behind the curtain in some ways, while just staring at a screen or, listening to a story.
Well, how do you balance out being a biologist and a school teacher with cryptozoology? Do you have to be careful? Do you get any pushback from, mainstream scientists or school administrators, parents, stuff like that?
No, I mean, my big thing is I go around and I tell traditional, Northeastern folklore stories. I have a character and I do those performances. I also write about like modern experiences, which are people's stories and, lumberjacks or guides having experiences. Those a few people feel pretty safe with, but then they get a little bit uncomfortable with, when, people start talking about these things that are beyond the scope of science. But the way I view it is, it's like I said earlier, it's a gateway science. It's something that like makes people wonder, it engages them, and then they start to study, if you want to discover what's in the world, you have to study the world. And I think it naturally lends people to like start exploring what's out there. And sometimes it lends people to get into like really crazy headspace, but I don't think the way that I don't get any pushback, because I'm always, I am a scientist, and, I will say that we don't have the evidence to support these exist scientifically, but, we have all this anecdotal cultural information, and that sometimes leads to some really cool discoveries, like medicines from plants that are, knowledge of people who've lived in areas for long, long periods of time, indigenous people, so I think it's all like about how you set perspective. If you go into this stuff and say it's like a conspiracy and people don't want you to know about this stuff and it's linked to this, and and it takes you into crazy places, then that's what people, I think, have a problem with. And it can do that. Like anything can do that. But it can also be a way of starting a great conversation, or getting people interested in going out in the woods, or, just sharing a good laugh. Some of the early lumberjack stories and my grandfather's guide stories are just hilarious. And some of the creatures they talk about are just absurd and, clearly weren't something that people thought were real experiences, but told this important cultural information. And so I think it's about like how you set the perspective of, what you're looking at. And if you keep a scientific mind and say, we can talk about culture and talk about society and talk about people's experience and not get, our tinfoil hats all crinkled up, then we'll do okay.
I like mine crinkled.
Reflects more of the mind control rays that way.
Yeah, of course. Hey, listen. So when you're in this kind of lifestyle, okay, so you're telling these stories, you're into science, biology, you're doing teaching at school and all that stuff. What led you down the road to writing a kids book?
Yeah. So even before I was interested in, like, obsessively interested in these mysterious creatures, I sort of inherited this knack for spinning a yarn and telling stories and like getting in front of people and performing these stories to some extent, and maybe I took it to more of an extent. And so for scout groups and church groups and things like that, I would tell, stories or historical stories, or like mindfulness lessons. And in fact, like Lumpy's gift was written as a mindfulness lesson, which is something I also teach in my science classroom. We have Mindful Mondays. There's curriculums about that. And it's about, thinking about what we do and how we think about the world. And somebody contacted me and said, hey, I'd like to have this lesson teaching generosity and mindfulness, and the students, I want them to do like a craft, and can you put something together like that? And I said, yeah, I think I can. And so I ended up writing this book, Lumpy's Gift, but I didn't write it as a book. I wrote it as a story to be performed and told. Lumpy is a lump of clay and gets molded by all of his crazy experiences, like a well-meaning potter digging him up from his moist and warm, squishy, dark hole, and, carries him in a bucket, and it's bright and dark, and it's bright and like loud and bumpy, and he dumps him on the potter's wheel and spins him and presses him and thumps him and shapes him and does all sorts of terrible things until he fires him, and Lumpy feels crusty and then hard, and he notices that he's got a shape and a body, and he becomes a gift, right? Like he becomes a cup. He gets transformed by all of his different experiences that he thought were terrible until he learned that they weren't. And so this story and like all of the big movements and the big, dancing around and like funny voices that you do during the performances of these, get people like out of their normal headspace to think about like, oh, wow, like there are things in my life that are hard and transform me and I can become better. And then they made this gift, like this thing out of clay, like they were playing with clay while I was telling this story. And then they ended up like shaping these objects. And then the teacher of this class took the took these objects and fired them in a kiln, and then they came back the next week and they had this little gift that they made that they got to give to somebody, and they got to think about how all the things in their life, transformed them into something they never thought they wanted to be, when they just wanted to stay in their dark, moist, and squishy hole.
So when you write a book for kids, like the Lumpy's Gift, for instance, do you have a meaning or some sort of purpose behind it? Is there something you hope the kids pick up from it other than just the entertainment or the fun of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the only way. Despite my really weird interests, I'm a really practical person. So if you give me a blank page and you're like, come and tell a story about whatever you want, I'm like, I have no idea what to tell a story about. I know hundreds of stories that I can perform, or at least, probably 100. And, but I will never come up, it would be that would be painful for me. And so I love to have a theme, or somebody needs something. And that's what stories are supposed to do. They're supposed to convey, some type of meaning, especially children's stories, or these, stories that we tell. That's how we share our culture with each other, whether it's a TV show or a novel or a children's book. All of that implicitly or explicitly teaches a story. And then for kids, it's really important to get these interests and have these stories, and then, have a way for, so my book has this discussion guide that lets them sort of, guides the reader today, or the teller, or the classroom leader, about what would be a good lesson for the kids to pull out of this. But it was because they wanted something about, being mindful and making a gift and transformation that really helped me to come up with that story. I totally love having a theme, and that's the best way to write a children's story. And a lot of the creature stories tell lessons about not going into the woods, or, think about all the common tropes of novels and TV shows and horror movies. There are certain messages that we're conveying in there that, whether we realize it or not, that are about being cautious and trusting people, and, and who's going to die first, I guess, in horror movies or whatever. I don't know. How
does it work for you? When you write a book like this, what do you yourself get out of it?
Oh, that's a good one. It's all about community for me. I mean, nobody goes through life and thinks maybe some people do, but I certainly don't. I wish, I never had to deal with, any people, and I didn't have a community or people that I cared about, or nobody ever did anything interesting. Everybody wants these connections with other people. So, stories are simple ways where we can open pathways of communication with other people. And I love that exchange where I give them my performance, they give attention, and then we get connection out of this at the end. And not just with me, but the people who listen to the story together, even if it's in a public place, they get melded into, a community as well. Just even if it's temporary, we're in these places together, but it's so easy to never notice anybody around us. And story is just I love it when you just meet somebody and they just tell you something in the checkout line or whatever, and you're like, oh, that was a good little story. You just shared a little snippet, and it brings people together. And I think if more people talked and had these simple things and didn't look for, we're so often looking for entertainment, but if we connect with people who are in front of us, that is a really powerful thing. And in some ways, writing a book is having a conversation, and creating this shared culture that then other people can talk about and have common ground to discuss as well. So even if the story is being conveyed through TV or radio or through a book, that is building community as well as building culture and society. And so that's what I get out of it. I feel it's making the world a better way, especially if it's kids, but even if it's for adults, that's a shared thing that we can all talk about and come together with.
So what have you got coming up next? Like what comes out now? You've done a little bit of cryptozoology, and you're doing you've done the children's book. So what's going to come out next for you?
Well, if I could settle on working on one project at a time, it would definitely help me. But I have a bunch of children's books that, I've written for storytelling that I would love to see, like Lumpy, become children's books. I'm also working on collecting more, New England folklore and creating, other books about, more familiar creatures involving their folklore, or even, other legends and things like that. So I'm working on all that. I don't have anything, right in the stable, ready to go. I also do a lot of like event organization where I put together like authors fairs, and I put together, cryptozoology conferences. I got one of those coming up in April through the International Cryptozoology Conference, which brings people together from all over the world and all over the country to hear, experts and TV personalities. And so just, architecting little projects like that bring people together are also things that I spend a lot of time writing about and talking about, and there are ways to get those stories out. But, more of the same for me, teaching science by day and telling stories by night.
So what goes on at these places, these shows that you do, these speeches, or these, conferences, I should say? What goes on? Like, what can someone expect if they go to a conference of cryptozoology and stuff, and what you speak to?
Yeah, so, it's kind of like any kind of like trade show or expo. If you went to an authors event, there would be authors at tables and vendors, and there would be speeches, and I organize those, ordinary types of things as well. But also, like at the Cryptozoology Conference, there's going to be Pat Spain, which is he's a biologist who's a cryptozoologist. He goes all over the world. He's done like National Geographic shows, and he's done Travel Channel shows about like legend exploring and monster hunting and things like that. And so he'll be talking, and Lauren Coleman, who's the founder of the International Cryptozoology Museum, is going to be talking, and I'll be doing some storytelling and talking, and people are coming in, Dave, there's some people coming in from Florida to talk, and, about Bigfoot and about sea serpents and about how Lovecraftian fiction ties in with all of that stuff. And so there will be talks, and there will be film screenings, and we've got like live reptiles for a fundraiser from this, herpetological rescue center called Herp Haven, that's local out here, and all sorts of, just things that are interesting that make people connect and bring people together. Tons of vendors. People can buy Bigfoot prints and keychains and all the other oddities that you might imagine would be at such a show.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you have any live Bigfoots there too?
Well, we do have. We're screening this film called Big Fur, and the Dan Walker, this international award-winning taxidermist, decided that he wanted to create a life-size, realistic taxidermy replica of sort of the most famous like Bigfoot footage. You've probably seen it. It's called the Patterson Gilman film, and it's like Bigfoot walking through a river valley, and he's made Patty from Bluff Creek there, and it's extremely realistic. And so he's gonna be bussing about as real of a Bigfoot as you can get into a conference out there, and see that, and it's pretty remarkable. So not exactly what you said, but sort of.
Well, that's all right. I'm just, checking it out
It's a fair
to see what's
question.
going on.
That would be for the best conference ever if somebody unveils an actual Bigfoot.
Yeah, I'm just checking. I just want to know what I'm going to get.
Yeah, you should come out.
Well, I don't know. They might mistake me for a Bigfoot. No, I guess I don't have enough hair, and I'm certainly not big enough, and I'm only a size 9 in the feet, so no, I guess
You're
not.
a ways away.
Yeah, I'm really a ways away. I'll tell you. That'd be a field trip. So now, are you doing social media? Do you have social media, and do you have a website and all that for people to come find you?
I sure do. So my website which is due for an overhaul with my new book coming out, is www.christopherpackard.com. And I have probably I'm most active on Facebook and Instagram. And on Facebook, I'm at CS Packard, which is where you just look up Christopher Packard, and you'll find me. And on Instagram, I'm at c.s.packard.
Wow. So you're all around.
All around.
Well, we appreciate you being here. Glad you came on. A good little talk about your new book. Now, the book we're talking about is Lumpy's Gift, and our guest is the author of that, Christopher Packard. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. This is a great conversation.
Thanks, Christopher.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.